Welcome to the Ethics Experts, where we're elevating ethics and compliance and HR to the strategic level it's supposed to be.
Hello.
Hey, Chelsea, how's it going?
Good. How you doing?
I'm doing good. Been excited to get you on the Ethics Experts.
Ditto. Happy Friday.
Yeah, happy Friday to you. You want to just dive right in?
Yeah. Sure.
All right. So I always like to start with, what kind of person were you like growing up? What kind of a kid were you? What kind of stuff were you into? What led you into this space,
Yeah, sure. So I think I was definitely a boss. I'm a twin. I have a twin sister. So it was always a comparison between the two of us. And my mom always said that I was like her second mother. So definitely a boss, definitely very academic, very athletic, dominant, and outgoing and confident, I would say. So definitely a leader from an early age.
You think that was just kind of wired into you? Were you born first or what?
I was born first. Yep.
See?
So I guess it was wired into me. I would also say
I will go first is what you told your sister.
Exactly. Always first. And, I was actually diagnosed with type 1 diabetes when I was younger. So as a child, so I think that was part of sort of growing up at a young age, sort of getting me into structure and following rules. And so, I thought about this the other day, but maybe that sort of translated into where I eventually ended up. I don't know. Yeah.
So what was that like being diagnosed with that at a young age? How did that change your childhood or something,
Yeah, I had an amazing childhood, but I think early on I had to grow up. I had to follow, a structure and a schedule, and I had my own sort of rules and regulations for myself, right? So I think it woke me up at an early age and sort of put me on a track of responsibility, I think.
And so you probably were not dreaming of being in compliance when you were a young child or even going through high school. So when you were at that age, where were you kind of thinking you were going to go?
Yeah. What do you want to be when you grow up?
Yeah.
For me, my parents joke with me all the time about this, but my mom asked me, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I told her, I want to be a lawyer. And she said, why? And I said, because you can argue with people and get paid for it. Right. So, and I really didn't know what a lawyer meant. Right. I had no lawyers in my family, not one, actually. So I didn't really know what it meant, but I knew it had to do with, I guess I was very performative when I was younger, and I knew it had a little bit to do with going to court, what you see on TV, going to court and arguing. And so that's what I thought it was. So I thought it would be a perfect career for me. I guess I was a negotiator with my parents at a very young age.
Do you have any little negotiators on your roster?
I do. I have two daughters. One out negotiates me any day, my 9-year-old. So yeah.
I got one like that too. I'm like, you better be a lawyer or something, because you got to use this.
You're too good at it, right?
Yeah, exactly. She won't, she's like a dog with a bone. She's just like so many questions of like, well, why not? And I'm just like, go to bed,
Right. We all have one.
Yeah, at least. All right. So you kind of going through high school, that was kind of the track you were on. You're like, I want to go to law school.
I think so. I sort of didn't really know what I wanted to do, but I was very academic. I was very social also, but very academic, really loved school, loved everything about it, especially and including like the social aspect. But yeah, that was always in the back of my mind as something I wanted to do.
So what was it? So you did undergrad and then you get into law school. What was that? Like, what was surprising about that? We have these pictures of what we think it's going to be. This is like true in my life. Everything I think I know, like what it's going to be like, it ends up being like wildly different, than my expectations. Like, what were some of those surprises that what was some of the surprising things, or what were some of the cool things about going through law school?
Yeah, so I would say even before law school, in college, I was grappling with, do I want to go into psychology? Because that was my major and I really liked it. And I liked going into the lab and I loved helping out in the lab. And then there was law school, which was sort of the more structured, for me, it was more guaranteed success, right? Like sort of a narrow path. You do this, you're going to go into big law, you're going to make a lot of money, and you're going to become partner, right? That was my mind frame. But I really like psychology, and so that was what I was struggling with, I think, in college. And then I get to law school and I do exactly that, right? I take that narrow path. I didn't know anything about M&A or corporate law or anything
Right.
like that. I didn't really understand that you could do anything other than go straight into litigation and become a litigation partner at a big law firm, right? And that's exactly what I did. I went to a big law firm. I was a summer associate there, and so I summered there. I became an associate there in litigation, big law. And that's sort of the narrow path I took because I didn't really understand that there were other options for me out there.
Yeah, isn't that interesting? Like, I was the first one in my family to go to college, and there was like just so much stuff that, like, looking back, I was like, oh man, I didn't even know about that track. I didn't even know about that other angle. I might have really liked this other thing. You know what I mean? Um,
Exactly.
do you look back on any of those other things like M&A? I mean, I think I used to think, it was kind of just this sort of single track. And then as I've had so many of these kind of conversations, I mean, there's really like 1,000 paths out of law school. Do you think any of those paths, like in retrospect, would have been interesting to maybe pursue or, kind of try on a little bit?
So for sure, I was at a very real estate heavy, so it was a big global law firm, but they specialized in real estate, and that's an area where I sort of wish I dipped my toe in a little bit, but it was
Hmm.
highly competitive, that area, and I just didn't know a lot about it. Like law, I didn't really have folks in real estate in my family, and so that's one area I wish I tried.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, there's all sorts corporate law also. Like now that I'm in house, I realize how beneficial it would have been to have studied or practiced corporate law early on.
Yeah. Well, we all kind of take our own path up the mountain. What was surprising about being in big law? What was cool about it? I mean, inevitably, I'm sure, like everything, like every pair of shoes you end up wearing, they start squeaking at some point. So there's probably some things,
Yeah,
that maybe the sheen wore off of, but like, what were some of those kind of good and bad parts of the
yeah.
experience?
It's a good question. I think about it all the time because I was at my law firm for a really long time and it was a great experience in terms of, skill building, issue spotting, just learning how to write well, which I mean, has translated to my career even to today. Organization, the client facing stuff I really liked. And we can go into that, and I'm sure we will. But, I did not like sitting at my desk writing a brief for a week. I didn't
Right.
like being alone in my office. I didn't like the hierarchical nature of a,
The
of a
the
big law firm.
politics.
The politics. And I was actually good at the politics, right? But I really didn't, I wanted to, when I got to prep a witness or go to court or, head up an employee group, which I did a lot of, the employee, I forget what it was called back then, but, it was to the employees talking about, problems they were having and how to be a parent and a lawyer at the same time and employee morale and things like that. Or, the group for, I think they were called employee resource groups, right? So
Yeah,
like
yeah.
women in law group. So I found myself doing a lot of that because I really craved sort of like the interpersonal connection that I wasn't getting when I was in my office writing a brief, right? And
Right.
I think over time I really ended up enjoying and learning a lot from sort of like the white collar defense work because I could meet with a witness and prep a witness for 8 hours, and I loved that rather than just sitting and writing and handing something to a partner who is then going to edit or rewrite it themselves.
Right. That you spent a freaking week on. What was it about
Exactly.
that like prep work that was so interesting? Was it kind of finding the angle or?
Yeah, it was first of all, it was action, right? It was like it
Right.
was talking to people, it was reading people, it was prepping someone so that they were confident and able to perform in the way they should perform, at a deposition or at a, investigatory interview or something like that. And I think it was just the fast-paced nature of that versus, being alone and writing and researching, like that to me
Yeah.
was not exciting and fun. And I didn't see myself doing that forever.
Did you enjoy litigation just sort of broadly? Was that a
I
very,
did.
and that
I
probably
did.
built some real skills.
I really enjoyed it. I liked translating a real world example, the facts of the case into, into a story, right? Creating a story from it. I enjoyed the structure of it. But it got a little bit, like isolating to a
Yeah.
point. But I really liked it, and all the skills I gained from my firm and from litigating, I still use today, just in a different way.
Yeah, I've had I don't know, we've done like over 250 episodes of this podcast, and I've noticed sort of some interesting trends of compliance folks who come out of litigation. They have some like similar characteristics, and I think in litigation you have to like find an angle quick. You have to know what matters and what doesn't matter. Like
Yep.
it's almost like you have to grow this like essentialism muscle. Like that has to get very developed in you if you're going to be successful in that space.
Yeah, for sure. And I would say, the ability to question someone
Yeah.
is not a natural, like question someone in the right way is not natural to everyone, right? And so I do a lot of training with HR folks on just how to conduct an interview to find out what happened without directing I'll call it a witness, but not a witness, the employee in a certain way, right? So I was on I was listening in on a interview by someone on HR who said, did you say X? That was in the beginning of the interview. Instead of, can you tell me a little bit about your position here?
Right.
How long have you been here? How's your relationship with Y? Just sort of going from broad to narrow.
Right.
And all of those things I think I developed in my work as a litigator that I still use today, albeit less adversarial, clearly. And I think that was a transition in the beginning, and probably why some in-house folks don't love hiring litigators as internal investigators, right? But I think if you tweak the way you question someone, you can still get to the answer in a less adversarial way.
Yeah, you don't have, sometimes those folks come in with their sleeves all rolled up, their fists all balled up,
That's right.
ready to
That's
get
right.
going,
That's right.
When you're training people on how to kind of do, as you said, sort of go wide or go broad to narrow, what is it at the root? Like, what is the reframe that you have to do kind of over and over again? Or like, what are the tendencies you see that are kind of low hanging fruit for someone to get better at this sort of investigative process?
Yeah. So I think connecting with the person and not, so I think setting the stage is super important, right? So if all you want to get to is some information gathering about something that may or may not happen, so it's connecting with the person and explaining to them why you're here, right? Sometimes when they see head of compliance or a lawyer on a call, they're like, I don't want to talk to you. But
Right.
sort of connecting on a personal level and saying, thank you for taking the time to meet with me. Today is really just about finding out what happened here. You're not in trouble, right? So I think just sort of setting the stage and making them comfortable. And then it was interesting. I was listening to one of your other podcasts, and you were talking, I don't remember who you were interviewing, and someone said sort of like play dumb in the beginning, right? So sort of pretend you don't exactly know what happened and just ask them about their role, their relationships. I understand that a meeting may have taken place, around October. Tell me about that, right? So it's more just sort of the open-ended questions first to set the stage, make the employee feel more comfortable opening up to you and not being defensive that you're getting to a specific, statement or document or topic.
Yeah, it's kind of bringing that temperature down, letting them kind of relax a little bit and kind of getting them talking is probably like a critical, at least initial kind of phase of those kinds of processes.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think prep is huge in sort of investigations and interviews, but being able to pivot quickly from one topic to another, or from, being able to work with your outline, but not following it line by line, is a skill that I think takes some practice and something you develop over time.
Do you think it's like some personality types are just better at that than others? Or do you think just kind of practice? It's just kind of like repetitions, or maybe a little of both?
I think a little of both. But I think when you understand, the basics and you continue to practice and see what worked and what didn't work, from interview to interview or investigation to investigation. I definitely think it's a skill you can develop over time and a muscle you have to sort of practice. Exercise, I guess is the right word.
Yeah,
muscle you have to exercise.
Yeah. This concept of questions, I think, is so interesting. Because it's like whoever's asking the questions is kind of controlling the flow of the conversation. And I even see on my own team this sort of bias for one question type over another question type. And it's not sort of the fluidity. Like sometimes you want to ask a really closed question. Sometimes you want to ask a really open question. And I find that some people just have, even people that are really good at asking, just the function of asking questions instead of just making statements, to kind of keep that sort of forward motion in the conversation. That in itself is a skill, but then I see sometimes people have a bias toward just these closed questions. They're asking alternative choice questions or yes or no questions kind of in general. And it's really like, I don't know. You have to, paint with a bunch of different colors. You have to be able to kind of flex between those other ones to kind of arrive at that conclusion. It's not just, it's not by rote. Every conversation is a little bit different. To your point, you have this outline, but you need to be able to kind of flex and make that feel natural if you're going to get them to detrow, so to speak,
Yeah, for sure. And I think I always use the phrase, tell me about, right?
Yeah.
So tell me about this, tell me about the meeting. And that sort of opens it up for them to say whatever they feel is important about that meeting or that relationship or anything like that. So that's sort of my go-to at the beginning of either transitioning to a new topic or starting a conversation is tell me about this, and then let them sort of lead the way.
Yeah, it's always so much easier if you can keep it away from that sort of adversarial energy or them perceiving that they're
Did you?
holding the swinging light in the interrogation room. You don't
exactly.
Exactly. Okay, so you were talking a little bit about some of the client work that you did that you found really valuable to you. Tell me about like what some of those things were.
Yeah,
I'm doing it now. I'm taking your tips right now. I'm throwing a couple of tell me about.
There you go. There you go. I'm happy to help. So I would say, going back to my law firm, right? I found myself really engaged with, at least toward the end of my career, with clients in developing sort of governance structures and policies around certain topics. Because at that point in time, I didn't really understand what compliance was, right? Until a client said, we need help with our compliance program around X, Y, and Z topic. And then I started to help with like sort of a governance program covering that topic and policies and procedures and things like that. And so I really liked that work. And I think that the way I ended up in compliance was through the work that I did on sort of policies and governance and things like that. And when the opportunity came up at my company now at Revlon, I was recommended for this role because of some of that work that I had been doing at the time.
And what did you find interesting about that? I mean, I find it interesting, now that I've been swimming in this pool for like 10 years, I find it so interesting when people are like, well, I didn't even understand what compliance is. And I candidly didn't either before I kind of got into the space. As you started to kind of dip your toe in, what were some of the things that kind of resonated with you that you're like, oh, this is actually kind of an interesting area?
Yeah. So I didn't really fully get it until I jumped into this compliance role. Like you, I really didn't know what compliance was, other than like, it's following laws, and it's coming up with governance structures and policies and procedures. And clearly I liked like the structural nature of that, like following the rules and translating it into policies. And I think it's a hard role to sort of describe, right? Because every day is a little bit different. So what I really like about it is you sort of figure out, based on how your business operates, right? What are the risks today? What are the risks generally, right? What are the risks today? And how can I be of most sort of value and use in making sure that employees understand that what they're doing matters, and sort of helping guide them to do something in the right way to avoid certain pitfalls, right? So I really like that aspect of it is helping to translate, sort of be a translator of regulations and rules and laws into an easily digestible way so that employees understand how it impacts their daily work.
What is it about structure that you like so much?
I think it's sort of just it helps provide sort of a framework for how you handle yourself every day, right? So like I'm a new employee. I always think about like new employees at a company, right? What do I do, right? Like how do you work here? What can I do? What can I do? What should I be focused on, right? And so I really like that aspect of structure is sort of like helping frame for new employees, for example, like how should they be doing their work and what should they be looking out for and what are the rules that they should be following, right? It seems simple, but it's clearly not because we all have jobs
Yeah, right.
and we need to do this work. But I really like that aspect to it. And then I think, part of what I love about what I do is how many people I speak to and meet with and talk to every day, right? So I'm basically helping to translate rules and regulations on a variety of topics. And I'm meeting with people all across the organization to help them do their job in the most ethical and in the most ethical way that's not going to get our company into trouble, them into trouble, and also just improve their ways of working, right?
Yeah. Have you ever done like the disc profile?
I have not.
You haven't. Okay. Because you're kind of an interesting combination because you seem like high dominance, high extroversion, but also like high conscientious, high details. That's a kind of an interesting combo.
Maybe I'll try that. But yeah,
maybe
I
you're
am.
dead center in the thing because you also seem kind of influential as well.
Maybe that's right. I think I'll have to do that.
You might have to, yeah. So what made you take this job in a title and in doing something where you didn't really understand it?
Yeah, so I was struggling just from a personal perspective. I think I was struggling a little bit with work-life balance, right?
Totally.
Which I think we all at a certain point, even though it sounds cliche, like especially for many females, right? Like when you get to a certain point in your career, I had 2 kids, I was at a big law firm, and I was like, this is not working for me, right?
Totally.
Like to go back to what I said earlier, I was so narrowly focused on to become a success, you have to work at a big law firm and become partner, right? Once you become partner, your life is complete. And once I was in it and I was a senior associate and I was sort of having those conversations with partners, where do you see yourself in 5 or 10 years? Which is a question I hate because I don't know where I see it depends what happens in life, right? But where do I see myself? I don't know, but I knew that I was struggling with, working on weekends and late nights and having 2 kids and a husband and a family, right?
Right.
And so that was sort of a decision I had to make was, do I keep pushing to become partner or do I pivot now that this opportunity came up, even though I don't know what I'll be doing? Clearly, you'll take a big pay cut and just see what happens. So it was a little bit more personal, but clearly professional because I wanted to do something different. I was sort of stuck where I was behind closed doors writing and I wanted something more collaborative, if that makes sense, and less hierarchical.
Yeah. When you kind of like let that, you had this picture in your mind, like you said, from when you were young of like going into law and becoming a partner. That was, as you just said, that's what success looks like. As you started to kind of like get into it and you started to see this hierarchy and you probably started to see partners that they weren't just kind of floating through life. They probably were losing their hair and they're stressed out more than ever and all those kinds of things. Was it kind of natural to let that sort of quote unquote picture of success dissolve or was it like kind of a jarring thing to say like, okay, now what?
Yeah. So I think I waited a long time to let it hit me that this probably wasn't right for me, right? Because there was such a strong part of me that wanted it so badly.
Totally.
But I think over time, like I would ask certain questions to maybe like the female partners, or I would ask questions about like, like how do you commute to work? And then how do you go to your kids' sporting events on weekends? Like I would ask all these questions on a personal level. And I think my last few years, it sort of hit me like I just have to accept that this is probably not for me. And I think I would be happier and more fulfilled somewhere else.
So it was kind of like a natural kind of evolution or a natural kind of a revelation?
I think that's right. Although to me, it felt a little bit cliche, right? Like I wanted to be, which I think many people do, I wanted to be the partner at the law firm who could still go to their kids' soccer games and could like make all
And
these,
do it all.
do it
Yeah.
all, right? And like I am doing it all now. I really do. But could I have done it all there?
Yeah.
I don't think that I could.
Well, and it's also hard to kind of underwrite, so to speak, to like what you want in your life before these new things sort of come into your life, like children
Right.
or a marriage or a husband or whatever. Like
Right.
it's hard to actually know because it's really like all these little marginal decisions, marginal decisions on where you're going to spend that next hour, or what call you're going to take or not take, or you know what I'm saying? Like your life kind of drifts into these other things. And before you know it, you can be living a life, if you're just too myopically focused on, again, just for shorthand, like what success looks like, you can find yourself. I mean, this is a cliche as well, like somebody who's wildly successful just in one aspect of their life, and they don't have, they didn't go to any of the soccer games, and they don't have good relationships with their kids and all that kind of stuff. It's an interesting kind of, path, because I think we all sort of go through that at various stages where, you're really committed to being a doctor, and then this is me. Okay. I really wanted to be a doctor. And then I got into like biology, and I was like, I do not like this at all.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? But
right.
what does success,
what does success mean to you? Right. And so success to me means something different than it did when I was younger.
Totally. Yeah, that's so interesting. I worked in a big financial firm, a Big Four accounting firm. And, I remember like going in, I was like, cool, yeah, I'll just kind of like go on this partner track. And as I started to get into it, I started to see these partners, and I was like, I do not like that life. Like that guy's life stinks. Like, I do not want to do that, stressed, late night, smoking cigarettes, balding, all that just from straight stress, But so then you seem like somebody who like is kind of a goal setter, and you run at those goals and you kind of solve for the outcome. How long did it was there any anxiety, and, maybe I'm projecting too much of myself into this conversation, but like, was there any anxiety kind of moving from this picture of success to something else? Or was it kind of a natural, like, well, I just know this isn't working, and I'm just going to kind of figure out what this new path is going to be?
Yeah. So I think a little bit of both. I think there's definitely anxiety starting at an in-house at a company, which was a lot less structured, to go back to a term that we keep using. But, something we had spoken about was once I started at my company in 2020, COVID hit.
Oh, right.
So it was 2 weeks. It was 2 weeks of in office work, and then COVID hit, and we were home. And then it was like, well, what do we do? I don't know anyone at this company. I don't even know how the business works. How am I going to understand this job and what I'm supposed to be doing without meeting with people and seeing people? And, it was the uncertainty of the world, but it was also the uncertainty of a new role and a new job. Right. And so, 2-3 weeks into work, I was told, by the way, you're going to be the head of our company's COVID committee. And I'm like, what is that? And they're like, I don't know. What do you think?
We need one, though.
Yeah, we need one. And we need some governance, and we need someone to make decisions and get people together and figure out what's important and look at all these regulations and see what we need to do in terms of, can we keep our manufacturing sites open? Can we, do we have to close our offices? Like all the things that every company dealt with, I was dealing with without understanding the business, without knowing anyone, without understanding like our org structure. And so that was sort of a really quick crash course in like, Revlon 101, right? Like what is this company? What do we do? Who's here? And I met everyone, and it was actually an incredible experience, as difficult as it seemed at the time.
Yeah, I mean, it's like you said, it's a crash course, and it's probably paid dividends down the road. Like you have to learn, to your point, all those things. Like, how did you even start with that? Like, you get an email or you get a phone call, you're going to be head of the COVID committee. And then it's like, what are you doing that first day, that first week?
Right. So there's a few things, right? I needed to understand the business and our global footprint and how we operated and where our offices were and where our manufacturing sites were. And, were we operating in salons and just how our business worked. I had to understand very quickly. How did I do that? I made friends pretty quickly. Right. I built relationships quickly so that so I could meet people, but also understand from them how the company works, right? And
Right.
so I really needed sort of like champions in each jurisdiction, location, office to be on this committee with me to help me make decisions in real time, right? So it wasn't just
Right.
me, it was reaching out to others and making sure that I could bring the right people together and create structure in meetings, right? So I would send out, first of all, people didn't know me. So they're like, who's this Chelsea girl? Like, getting 50 of us on a call together, right? So that was quick visibility for me across the organization. But it was setting up agendas to say, like, what are we dealing with? Let's talk about the regulations. Let's talk about, where we need to make decisions. Let's talk about closing our offices and testing and all the things that we all were dealing with. It was sort of creating a structure and herding cats a little bit to make sure that the right people were were in the meetings and in the room at the same time.
Man, I'm going back to that time, and it was such a crazy time. It was like, I remember, this is going to be 2 weeks, everything's going to be back to normal.
Yeah.
And so there's so many starts and stops and so many, I remember the blood red ticker on the bottom of CNN of just like the death toll going, and like everyone was so heightened and everybody was so worried, and there was just so much to sort through. I mean, there was so much to sort through in our little business. I can't imagine in this multinational company kind of trying to figure all that out. That must have been nuts.
It was nuts. It was fun, but it was nuts. And like I said, it was a really good way for me to jump in and meet people.
Totally.
And have people meet me and see me sort of stepping up and leading this very uncertain area, right? Like,
totally.
There were rules popping up left and right, and we had to sort of do our best to figure it out as this uncertain time developed.
Yeah. And I mean, it probably laid such a great kind of pattern recognition throughout the stakeholders in the organization with respect to you and your role, because you got to be introduced in this sort of like really heightened thing where there was this, remember after 9/11, like everybody, there was no Democrat or Republican, like everyone had the yellow thing, the yellow ribbons on their trees. And there was like sort of like this like unified purpose, or there's sort of like a united front kind of across the whole country. And there was a similar kind of a thing during COVID, because so much was changing and everyone was worried and all that kind of stuff. It really, you said you were herding cats, but there was also, I'm sure it was much different than, just the random, compliance initiative du jour. Like, I'm sure there was a much different level of attention, and probably, you've probably been able to like ride that wave over the last several years there.
I have, especially people who have been at the company since that time.
Right.
I've sort of become their like go-to gut check person for a lot of things, right? Which for me makes my job a little bit more random and difficult sometimes. But, on the other hand, I'd rather someone use me as a gut check than not use anyone as a gut check, right? And so I found myself, instead of sort of like a roadblock, more of like, we want to do something, let's get Chelsea involved to see how we can do this in the right way, to just get her opinion on things. And so I think I've used that experience to sort of paint myself in a way that is less of a roadblock and more of a thought partner.
Yeah. Man, it's, again, like you said, it was so nuts, so crazy, but what a phenomenal experience. I mean, imagine going into an organization without that. Like, how would you synthesize something like that?
I don't know what my experience at my company would have been like if not for that.
Totally. It would have been totally different.
That experience, totally different.
Just the credibility build, the relationship, like understanding, I had somebody on, the podcast in the past. His name is Forrest, and he joined a large company to kind of set up their compliance program right as they were forming their first JV across kind of the world. And he kind of got involved with that. And it was sort of a similar thing. He got to really like learn who the players were, learn what the power structure is, learn what mattered most to the business, how the business kind of works and stuff like that. And he was just talking about how impactful that was for like the ensuing projects and things he did as he got sort of more focused on the compliance program itself, because he knew kind of who to call and he already had relationships with all these people. And it was really kind of like this trial by fire that laid really the groundwork for a really successful program.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what happened here. And I learned how employees work, which is something, I think at a company, you learn very quickly that if you don't make something very easily digestible, right, and easy to do, no one's going to read it, right? No one's going to do it. So like today, no one's going to read a 20-page policy. It will never happen unless you need the 20-page policy and you put a 1-page cheat sheet on the front, right? Or an infographic or something like that. So things like that I learned very quickly. What goes the furthest when it comes to training, and what do people pay attention to, and how do you remind people of things, and how do you, structure meetings, and just all of that I learned very quickly.
When I was in, finance before I got into compliance. Yeah. And in finance, it's like every week you're working 60 hours a week. There was like a different sort of pace of things. And when I got into this company, I felt like, whoa, this is like way different, like I don't want to say work ethics. I think everybody works hard, but I'm just saying like the amount of work people were like willing to do was very different. And that was like such a, when you hop out of a hot tub and you jump in the pool, like it feels so cold. I remember feeling like kind of jarred by that. Were there any things like that? I mean, I'm sure there were some kind of similarities coming from big law to a corporation, that there's maybe a different politics thing, that like the power dynamics are a little different. It's maybe more distributed. The pace of work, the work-life balance, all those things are probably like very different than the, fiefdom you left, so to speak. What were some of those things that you had to adjust to?
Yeah. So I think most of those things were positive, right? So I had grown up at my law firm from little Chelsea summer associate to senior associate, right? And so I always felt like the little kid in the room. Whereas now this is my role. I'm sort of a grown up for the first time at a company. People are meeting me for the first time and relying on me for my expertise in a particular area, or my, thoughts, or my, whatever. They were looking to me as the go-to person. And so I really liked that. For the first time, I felt like the adult in the room, and that people needed my opinion and wanted my opinion. So that was a really great shift. I think the second thing was a lot of women in very high level positions for the first time, right? So yes, there were female partners at my law firm, but when I started at my company, the CEO was a female, the chief compliance officer was a female, the CFO, and it was really refreshing to see for the first time. And they had kids and they had families and all of that. And I could see role models for the first time that really were doing what I wanted to do, right? Which is be really, impactful, successful, whatever that means, women at work, but also, at 5:00, if you need to leave to go catch your train to go home, like that's okay too, right? And you didn't need to be the last person in the office just to be there for FaceTime.
Totally.
So that was super refreshing to me. And then I think the other shift that I saw going in-house was people cared about you as a human being, right? So like,
not as a labor unit,
Exactly. I wasn't billing on 6-minute intervals anymore, right? People were, having coffee with me and asking me about my weekend and actually cared about what I had to say, right? And so that was huge for me.
Totally.
Just that shift of you're a person, you're not a bot.
Yeah, my gosh. That's probably so refreshing, right? Just kind of a different sort of value set, or a different sort of priority list, and a bunch of role models that you could look up to and kind of emulate, because you kind of end up being a product of your environment to some degree. And whatever the currency is of whatever environment you're in, you end up kind of trying to solve for, I think. You know what I mean?
That's exactly right. It was very refreshing and a really good change for me.
Man, that's awesome. So as the COVID things kind of settled down, like for your first couple of months, was that kind of like 100% of your time on the COVID committee?
Not 100%, but it was the
Most
bulk
or
of my
something.
time, right? Because every day I was having back-to-back calls with different offices, different business units, right? So it was the majority of my time, I would say. And at that time, there was a chief compliance officer that I was reporting to. So I didn't really have like the full gamut of all things compliance, right? I could do certain projects.
Were you starting to form a vision, like you're learning about like kind of what the true scope of compliance is, what the risk surface is that you need to kind of have your eyes on? You've driven a lot of innovation in your program over time, or at least been a part of it. Were you starting to kind of formulate, it's kind of like when you buy a house, you're like, okay, I'm going to knock this wall down and stuff. Like, were you starting to kind of formulate like what could be? And if so, like what were some of those opportunities for improvement or more impact that you were starting to kind of formulate as we're kind of, moving through your first, chapter there?
Yeah, I think I definitely was starting to learn, you look at the 7 elements of an effective compliance program, and that's sort of like where you want to start. And then you see like what do we have, what don't we have, and what will impact our employee base the most, right? So I think I was thinking more about structure around investigations and bringing HR into the loop to make sure that they were playing their part. I saw a lot of opportunity there, a lot of opportunity in the third-party risk management space. So there were areas that I was picking up on that I could see myself adding value without sort of owning every aspect of it, if that makes sense. So
Yeah.
I think early on I was starting to see areas where I thought maybe this could be improved a little bit.
So then tell me about kind of the progression, because now this is, we're kind of 6 years now after this whole COVID chapter, right? Maybe 5.
Yeah.
Tell me about the kind of progression as that dust kind of settled and as you started to kind of get your hands or your fingerprints on the program to a greater degray.
Yeah, I mean, that's a loaded question, but yes.
That's all I ask. That's all the kind of questions I ask.
That's a loaded question. I think, the scope of my role over time has certainly increased. Less project based and more program based, right?
Yeah.
So my hands in a lot more pots than it used to be. And, beyond, I would say like the core compliance things that you think about, right? Which is managing investigations and, code of conduct and training and policies and procedures. I'm also finding myself, for better or for worse, right, helping out in a lot of different areas. ESG, right? That's an area where some compliance officers have a huge role. Some have less of a role. It sort of depends on the size of your organization and where the business is going. But, AI governance is a piece that, clearly it didn't really exist it was very different way back when than it is today. That's another area where I'll help. Third-party risk management is another area. And then just like improving ways of working, right? Contract governance, policy governance, like how can we solve for some difficulties in the company and sort of just giving my feedback and taking the lead on some crisis management is another area, right? So there's a lot of different things that I've sort of dipped my toe in that I wouldn't think were part of like a core compliance program when I started out.
Yeah, and they probably weren't on the job description that you signed up for.
They were not. I didn't even understand the job description when
you're like, whatever, get me out of here. Yeah,
I'm like, that sounds good.
But you said something, I don't know, 15 minutes ago or something, that you were like, the job of, I'm going to butcher this, but like the job of compliance is really to be helpful and be useful in kind of pursuit of the organization's mission, to kind of like de-risk it. That's kind of the boiled down version of what I think you said. And what I was struck with in our first conversation was, I kind of have this view that like compliance can be the circulatory system of the organization. There's so much stuff that can wind up like, I don't know, somebody who's in ops or somebody who's in, I don't know, procurement, for example, they're not even, it's not even potentially on the radar to talk about ESG, but for like screening for it, maybe when they're finding a new vendor, or like crisis management or all these other things. Like you listed a whole sort of wide, bouquet of things. And I think I was struck by, you're somebody who has really executed on that potential impact, that it's not just narrowly focused. Like compliance's impact doesn't necessarily have to be relegated to those 7 elements. There's a bunch of other things where like your perspective or your risk management tool set can be applied. Your structure, your sort of bias for a flexible structure that allows people to do their job in a better way, that you could kind of add some value to, and you didn't let I don't know. I just find like a lot of people in compliance, they end up kind of falling into kind of what you described back at Big Law, where they're just kind of stuck in their office and they're just kind of doing things, and they're not sort of breaking out into the business and being really that connective tissue that compliance can be. And I think when it does that, it really it changes the whole sort of slope of growth for the function.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. I think relationship building for me has been probably one of the most important things that I've done throughout my career. I think again, this goes back to, I was listening to one of your other podcasts. I think you said it helps build permanent context, right?
Yeah.
Which is when you find like your HR friends and your procurement friends and your IT friends and your, supply chain friends, then you can not spread the work, but you can rely on them to do certain things for you, or to give you the information you need, or to, sit down together in a meeting and say, this is not really working. How can we improve X, Y, and Z process? Right. So I think relationship building is huge in figuring out like, what are the risks to the organization, right? And what is the business focused on today? And that helps sort of like, it builds your to-do list, but it also helps you to focus and prioritize on what matters today to the organization. Maybe beyond, like what are our biggest risks? Where is the company going, and how can I help the company do it in the right way?
Because that stuff is changing all the time. What the company is focused on today is probably very different than what it was focused on as like the big fire, the big initiative, or whatever from 3 years ago or something like that. And so many times I see a lack of flexibility. For as much as you talk about structure, clearly there's a lot of flexibility in how you end up interacting with the business. And I just see a lot of compliance programs that they're kind of etching their program in stone, and they're etching their to-do list in stone. It's like, that ain't how the world works. Like, it's changing all the time. And if you don't have those relationships and you're not getting that sort of respiration back from these different sort of organs of the, corporate body, so to speak, then you're kind of looking at the world through a pinhole.
Yeah, I think the to-do list is something that I can't live without, right? So like, it's funny that you say like you're structured, but you can still be flexible. And if you looked at my to-do list, it would make sense to you, right? So my to-do list is, I'm old school and I write everything down like with a pen, right? Which no one does anymore. It's AI everything, right? And AI transfer everything. But I take a piece of paper and I write my to-do list once a week. And my to-do list has all of the biggies on it, all the things that I have to do. But then every week it changes with like, what's highlighted this week, right? What is my priority for this week or today? Because you constantly have to be agile and sort of go with the flow and see like, what does the business need today, while still keeping track of those foundational fundamental elements that you need to, or projects that you need to go back to.
Man, it's such a, people who say that like compliance is boring, I'm just like, you don't know the game then. It's not boring. It's always a new puzzle. It's always a new thing to figure out,
It's not boring. And I think what's good for us and keeps things interesting, although sometimes puts more work on our plate, is what is like, I don't think anyone understands really what compliance is, especially when a compliance person sits on the legal team, right? And so I think the word, like whenever we get, like a questionnaire from a third party supplier, right? Like an ESG question or whatever, if the word compliance is in it, it goes to compliance. And that doesn't mean that it's a compliance form or that I should own it, right? But because it says compliance, it goes to me. So, and I know that's a silly example, but I end up touching a lot of things that I otherwise wouldn't, and I don't really mind it, right? I can forward it to the right person and say, this is more in your wheelhouse. Can you prepare the responses, and then I'll review it, as a final step, right? Or I'll give you my feedback. So I end up doing probably a little more than I would have otherwise, but then I learn the business and I understand what's coming in, and I make relationships with additional employees. And so I actually really like sort of the flexible nature of it.
I want to talk a little bit about relationship building, because as long as I've been in this space, this has been a topic. I think life is relationships, and I think some compliance folks are really good at it. I think you're really good at it. Just what you described on being useful, and also at the same time, letting people know like what's in your wheelhouse to get invited into kind of this sort of wide array of different projects that things you can kind of have some input into. And then you have other compliance folks that are maybe super introverted and they kind of struggle with those things, or maybe they're not dominant enough to like step into rooms that they're not like, cordially invited to or whatever. What advice would you give a compliance officer who wants to build relationships, but has not, for whatever reason, maybe they're in an old program that, maybe has a bad reputation, or maybe they're new at the organization or whatever. What advice would you give them on how to build the types of relationships that allow for that sort of, real kind of growth, or that real impact that is sustainable over time?
Yeah. So I think just reaching, especially when you're new, that's like the best excuse, right? To meet people, which is, I'm new to this role. I just want to understand a little bit about sort of what your role is and what you do and your area. Can we get a quick coffee or something? And can I just pick your brain? Right. So I think that's the first step in building relationships is, taking the time to meet with someone to just understand their role, what they see as the risks in their role, and to just understand how the business works. I think that's one. And two, get yourself invited to meetings, right? I say it all the time. Like there's a meeting coming up about like our insurance coverage. And I'm like, you know what? I should know more about X, Y, and Z. Can I join? Right? Can I sit in on that meeting? And so like that will help you get invited to more meetings, right? Or, the marketing team or another team is meeting about, a specific topic, and you say, I'd like to join to understand like, what's happening, what's top of mind for you. So getting invited to meetings, and then you end up in turn getting invited to all sorts of things that you maybe ordinarily wouldn't as like as compliance.
Yeah, you got to kind of put yourself out there. So just curious, let's say you asked to get invited to 10 meetings, 100 meetings. How many are you told no about?
None.
Exactly.
I don't think, no one will ever say no.
No one's going to say no.
For you to come and sit in and listen in and give your input if you want.
But it's so interesting. It's like we really are kind of shackled, we like shackle ourselves.
We shackle ourselves. That's right.
It's crazy. Why do you think people struggle with that? Do you think it's just the fear of rejection, or the fear of being told no, or the fear of stepping out of the lane that they're supposed to be in, whatever that means?
Yeah, I mean, it may be right. It may be something about your personality, right? Which is really nothing we can do except for sort of getting out of our comfort zone. I think too, it also may depend on the structure of your compliance program, right? Many of us with like very small, nimble programs, like we don't have to sort of like report up through a reporting line, right? So I can sort of like make this role my own. And so that gives me flexibility to go to meetings that maybe like my boss would go to, or my boss's boss would go to if it was more of a hierarchy and a bigger team. So maybe it's a little bit of that also.
My favorite thing, you said so much good stuff, but like make it your own is really advice for everybody. Like you got to make whatever role you're in your own. And there's probably, if you're not making it your own, you're probably imposing some rules or some power structures that might not even exist until you actually try to push those lines a little bit. It's so interesting that in a kind of like quote unquote rule heavy, regulation heavy role, the key to success is like, I don't know, pushing the envelope a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think what's tough about compliance, right? It's like it's good and bad is that there's no one telling us these are the things you have to do, right?
Right.
There's elements, right? There's some sort
Concepts.
of concepts, guidance. There's guidance, right? But there's no rules or regulations. And so you have to make it you have to make it your own under the umbrella of what we should be doing, right? An industry best practice. But there's no one really telling you focus on this one more than the other, right? This element more than the other. You have to figure out based on how your business works and what your risk profile is, what you should be focusing on in your organization.
Yeah. I mean, it's as you were kind of describing that, I was just like thinking to parenting, like you kind of make your family your own and you kind of end up sort of focusing on the things that are most important for you and so forth. I realized that we're over time. My gosh, this time flew by. I could have gone another hour with you. This was really a lot of fun. So before we wrap up, if you have one quick minute, if you could go back in time and find a young Chelsea, what's a piece of advice that you wish you had when you were younger?
I would say, don't get focused on a single predetermined career path. I would say network, go to events, go to panels, talk to your professors, talk to someone outside your role, talk to people and understand the different options you have, right? Beyond where you think you need to go in order to be successful.
Love that.
Break out of the structure a little bit in order to realize there are other opportunities out there other than a straight and narrow path.
I'm so inspired. This was really a phenomenal episode. Thank you so much, Chelsea. Thanks for joining us on the Ethics Experts.
Of course. Thanks for your time. This was great.